Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Concert Recollections from an Aging Rock Fan, or what I can remember from the good old days after finding a box of my old tour programs from the 1970s and 1980s in the loft. I'd not been in the loft for decades, went up there, found a box, well, number of boxes. In one of them was all sorts of tour programs I had from back then, some of which you can see in the graphic there. Based on them, and it brought back all sorts of memories. I put an ebook together based on what I could remember. That's available for completely free download from the website newwaveofbritishheavymetal.com. And I thought I'd put together a random series of videos, so it's available in that format as well. And so this is episode 3, and it's about what the rock music was like in the UK in the late 1970s, early 1980s, which were my peak concert going years. Now, of course, things were much different back then, some 50 years ago, not least as when my musical epiphany struck in 1977, as I explained in episode 2, I was a mere 15-year-old kid and still at school. Back then, there was no internet, no email, no social media, no YouTube, no streaming, no downloading, and all that kind of stuff which we've got now wasn't available then to discover and discuss new musical finds and whatnot. Instead, it was down to word of mouth and reading the likes of Sounds, Melody Maker, and the New Musical Express, which were the weekly music press. And that's how you found out what was going on. Reading those weeklies from front page to back was a highlight. Making notes on which bands you wanted to know more about, combining lists of albums that you wanted, discussing with your friends at school or around each other's houses after school and at weekends what you fancied and what you didn't fancy. Now, at that time, the area where I lived was just outside of Sheffield in South Yorkshire. And the area where I was, to say, outside of Sheffield was a bit of a wasteland as far as music was concerned. There weren't any local record shops or concert venues, for example. It was necessary to catch the bus into Sheffield because, of course, 15 years old, you can't drive. And, we'd get the bus into Sheffield on a Saturday morning and troll around all the city centre record shops, of which there were plenty back then. That was the usual Saturday morning routine. Bus into town, schlepp round Bradley's Records. I think they had 3 branches in town from memory. And also the main department stores, some of which had small vinyl selections such as Wilson Peck, Boots and Woolworths. There were also some cracking independents such as Record Collector at Broomhill. I think they're still going. I say I think because I don't live in Sheffield any longer. There were also some others, such as, let's see what I can remember. There were Violet Mays, Can the Music Man, I think that's what it was called, Impulse, Revolution, and I'm sure there were more, but it's 50 years later and I'm old and I forget and I just can't remember. Right down at the bottom of a street called the Moor in Sheffield, which was a long shopping street. Right at the foot of that, one year a Virgin Record store opened. Can't recall exactly what year it was, but it was late 70s, early 80s. As that Virgin Record store at the bottom of the moor was the furthest from the bus stop, we'd go there first, have a look round, and then work our way back to the bus stop for the bus home via all the other record shops that we could cram in at the time that we'd got available. It became something of a failure if after a hard Saturday doing the record shop rounds, I went back home without buying at least one album. If there was a particular album that you wanted, say something you'd read about in Sounds but wasn't freely available over here, back then, remember, there was no Amazon to deliver something and whatnot. If you wanted something that wasn't available here, like an import, you had to order it from somewhere, wait weeks for the import to arrive at the shop, and then go and pick it up. How inconvenient. Wouldn't put up with that today, would we? And for some of the more obscure stuff, you relied on some of the more specialist outlets which would advertise in the weeklies. One in particular I used was called Lotus Records in Stafford. They were great, very reliable, and once they'd received your order, they forwarded it on to you at home. Fantastic. We were able to obtain imports via them quite regularly, and one in particular which has stayed with me over the years is Universal Juveniles by Max Webster. Max supported Rush over here on their Hemispheres tour in 1979. I'll get round to that in a future episode. And Max Webster impressed me so much, I simply had to get their albums. It wasn't easy though, but with the help of Lotus Records, mission accomplished, and I managed to get all of them. Another route was mail order from bands which would directly advertise in those weeklies. I'm very proud that I was able to bag one of the original 1,000 copies of Diamond Head's legendary first album that way. Alas, not one of the signed copies, but even so, I've still got that original vinyl to this day. I don't listen to it because, well, it's too valuable, isn't it now? And because there aren't many of those original 1,000 copies left. Turning to TV and radio sources for rock music, these were few and far between as well. The old grey whistle test was essential viewing on the BBC. If you're of a similar age to me, you will remember the old grey whistle test with very, very fond affection. Legendary host Whispering Bob Harris introducing us to many great up-and-coming bands, playing a short set in the studio. And Annie Nightingale was another great host back then in the early days as well. Radio was a bit bleak as well. We had the Friday Rock Show on Radio 1. That went out, if I recall, at 10 o'clock on a Friday night until midnight and was hosted by Tommy Vance. TV on the radio, as he became known. Many aspiring band, particularly as new wave British heavy metal bands started to emerge, did a set for Tommy's Friday Rock Show, and listening to that was an excellent way to discover new bands to get into. And a part of that was the you might remember this if you listen to Friday Rock Show. There was a weekly brain teaser of the Friday Night Connection. Remember that, right? 3 tracks would be played, with the object being to guess the connection between the 3 of them. We also had the John Peel Show, though John was generally more punk new wave stuff rather than what you might call traditional rock music. In Sheffield, South Yorkshire area, we had a local radio station, Radio Hallam. They had a weekly rock show, but I think that was only an hour a week, if I remember correctly. But anyway, by making the most of what scant resources there were, you could still get exposure to new bands via all those routes. As to concert venues, as I mentioned, there were none where I lived just outside of Sheffield. So that was a route that wasn't available locally. If you wanted to go to a concert, you had to get the bus into Sheffield. The main venue in Sheffield being the City Hall. There were smaller venues such as the Limit, the Lead Mill, Lyceum and Top Rank. And on hitting legal drinking age in 1980, some pubs, but not before I hit 18, of course, because, well, that had been illegal and none of us took a drink before we were 18, did we? There'd also be the occasional trek out of the area for a little bit of an adventure, maybe across to Manchester or Leeds or Stafford Bingley Hall was a reasonably regular trip. These out-of-town adventures were usually via train over the Pennines or to Leeds, or if Stafford Bingley Hall was on the agenda, there was a local coach company, I think they were called Cavendish Travel, and they would often run coaches to bigger name events, in particular at Bingley Hall. Sheffield City Hall was on the circuit for the bigger bands, and quite often, there'd be 2 or 3 playing a week that you'd fancy going to see, and we'd go and see just about anybody, no matter who they were, if nothing else for the night out. And of course, back then, concerts were much, much cheaper than they are now. These days ticket prices are outrageous, aren't they? So the financial strain of going to see a band wasn't as painful as it is now, and it could be managed much better after I started work in 1978 and had the money to support my growing album and concert addiction after tipping up weekly keep to my parents. Ticket prices were so cheap back then. One of the earliest concerts I went to, which I'll expand on in a future episode, was a three-band triple bill featuring Boxer, Crawler, and Moon. I think that was a quid, three bands for a quid, and there was a free single chucked in on the seat as well. Fantastic. Anyway, that's a quick look at what things were like back then in the late 70s, early 1980s, and what I can remember about it for a little bit of context. In future episodes now, well, next one I'll talk about how the new wave of British heavy metal became my genre of choice, and it still is to this day. And then after that, we'll get into some specific concert by concert recollections, including those that I still have the programs for, so I can show you some of that as well. But until then, thanks for putting up with listening to me if you've got this far. If you have, please subscribe to the channel because that would be marvelous. If you want to download the free ebook version of this, you can do from newwaveofbritishheavymetal.com. Link in the description. There's no opt-in required or anything like that. It's a direct download, no details required. So until next time, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and take care.